And then moving on briefly to the August lunar eclipse in Pisces, given what you were saying about Uranus and Sedna, what I thought was so interesting there is, of course, that we get a mutable T square with Uranus and Sedna in Gemini,
Yeah.
and then the Sun and the Moon again in Virgo and Pisces.
Mm.
So what I thought was interesting there is that it picks up a couple of things that happen in Minneapolis, or that have sort of come up in Minneapolis. The first is that it takes place in the Human Design Gates 59 and 55, which are all about profound connection and altruism. So this generosity of spirit, but in a collective sense, which we did see so strongly, as you said, in
Yeah.
Minneapolis, where you saw communities really looking out for each other, neighbors looking out for each other. And that's such a wonderful counter to this sense of isolation and this kind of disconnection epidemic that's been so pronounced over the last few years, due to sort of things like social media. So
Yeah.
it's really bringing people together. So this is the upside. And then the other thing, of course, is that if you look at the Vandenberg Saros series, because
Uh-huh.
Bernadette Brady's ones only really work with the solar eclipses, there, if you have a look, it's part of the 138 Vandenberg Saros series, which links back to eclipses in 2008 and 2013.
Mhm.
So again, there's this strong tie to 2008 and the global financial crisis,
Mhm.
which I do think we're seeing, for example, in the rise of populism around the world. I think a lot of that can be linked back to what happened during the global financial crisis. I thought it was so interesting that recently Michael Lewis did a retrospective of the Big Short. He did
Yes.
a
Yeah.
podcast series. I don't know if you heard that,
Yes. Yeah.
where they were kind of going back and they were looking at what's happened since then and so on. And I mean, one of the things that really struck me was that he really makes the case, talking to other experts, that what this showed was that there was one rule for the 99% and another rule for the 1%.
Yes.
And that sparked movements like Occupy. And I think it has led to what we're seeing with Uranus Sedna, particularly Sedna. I think since we spoke last time, I interviewed an astrologer in Portland
Mhm.
who is working quite a lot with Sedna, because, I was very interested. I was quite intrigued after we spoke. I wanted to know more about what other astrologers were finding. And one of the things that she said she found was, aside from the obvious link to things like abuse, which we've seen with, for example, the Jeffrey Epstein victims, she also saw a very strong link to social justice movements and to people who are kind of activists in that area. And of course, Occupy and movements similar to it, which have now moved into political movements like, say, the Green Party and
Mhm.
so on, I think are starting to show themselves through this Uranus Sedna combination. So I think we seem to be at a really interesting time politically, and not just locally, but globally, where, as you say, things are sort of coming to light and things are being revealed that maybe were always there below the surface, but then people like Trump actually say the quiet part out loud. And it does seem to spark something in people. It almost sets off that anger that's been kind of boiling below the surface, which we're now seeing, kind of erupt through the Mars stuff, you know?
I think you're absolutely right about this. And I mean, I'm very concerned about August, full stop. My reasoning for that is just as you've described there, but also the fact that Saturn will station square the US sun. So
Okay.
that doesn't look very good to me. I mean, I have a rule here that you shouldn't really say anything unless you can back it up 4 or 5 different ways. But I think
Sure.
this is, the eclipses, the picture around the eclipses, the signs that they're in, Saturn squaring the US sun, and still actually within orb of our own, right? Because our own is what, 10 of Capricorn. So
Is this in the Union chart?
the 18 of
Okay,
one
so
chart,
the
yes.
Union chart.
So,
Yes, yes,
so
yes.
Saturn has got to come in to square that sun. But what we haven't spoken about, and I think is another layer of this, and this would definitely feed into the Occupy and all of those other movements,
Mhm.
is that Chiron is going to move into Taurus, right? Just goes
Yes,
in
of course.
time. it's in just for a few months, a bit like Uranus going into Gemini last summer. It gave us an overture, a little hint of what was going to come. Well, when
Yes.
Chiron went through Taurus before, people then become aware of lack. I think that's the simple terms. They become aware of what they don't have.
Absolutely.
So it isn't necessarily a question of what they want, but what they have not got. Right. So
Absolutely.
and I think when we get into August, because the August thing happens just after we've had the Jupiter-Pluto opposition, the gambler's curse one, which is in July, right? If markets do what I think they're going to do, right, you're going to have an awful lot of very, very unhappy people, right? And especially those who are slightly older, who lived through the 2008, 2007, the global financial crash, and didn't feel that bankers were ever held, culpable.
Yes, to account.
Yeah,
Yes.
right. Then you're going to see a big move towards, well, listen, come on, guys, this is a repeat performance, and this is not okay.
Yes, because I mean, it's certainly, I mean, at that stage, I think I had a pension that was linked to the stock market, and a huge amount of my pension value just got knocked off after 2007, 2008. So anybody who was retiring then, or who was thinking about retiring, was put back several steps. And of course, we've seen all sorts of moves with the bond market and that kind of thing, particularly here, in the UK, which affects pensions.
Yeah.
So yes, you're right. But I think people are already feeling that